There is a love in the Bible that defies everything we know about forgiveness, faithfulness, and redemption. A love that was tested by betrayal, publicly humiliated, shattered by pain, and yet it did not give up. This is the story of Hosea and Gomer, the marriage God used to show the whole world how He loves, even when we are unfaithful. An obedient prophet, a broken woman, a divine commandment that no one would understand, and a message of restoration so powerful that it echoes even today in every wounded heart that still seeks to start over. Today, you will learn the true story of a man who received from God the most difficult command a prophet has ever received: to love what seemed impossible to love. You will discover who Gomer was, why she was chosen, and how their marriage became living proof of unconditional love in the Bible. But be warned, there is a special revelation saved for the end of this video, something that will completely transform the way you see God's love for you. Prepare your heart, because when God writes a love story, He spares no effort to show that redemption is real, and that no betrayal, no wound, no past is too great for the restorative power of divine love. Israel was plunged into spiritual darkness. The people had abandoned the true God to worship idols of wood and stone. Pagan temples multiplied on the hills. Ritual prostitution was celebrated as religion. The covenant with the Lord had been broken, trampled, forgotten. And in the midst of this moral and spiritual chaos, God needed to send a message that no one could ignore. It was then that He chose Hosea, a young prophet faithful with a pure heart, someone who knew the voice of God and was willing to obey it, no matter the cost. Hosea walked the streets of Israel, seeing the people drifting further and further away from the Creator. He prayed, he fasted, he cried out for an awakening. But what God was about to ask of him was not just a spoken message. It was a lived message. The word of the Lord came to Hosea in a clear, direct way, impossible to ignore. And with that word came a calling that no other prophet of the Old Testament ever received. It would not be a journey to the desert. It would not be a confrontation with kings. It would be something much more intimate, much more painful. It would be his own life transformed into a living parable. Hosea knew that obeying God meant renunciation, but what he didn't yet know was that this time the renunciation wouldn't just be his. It would be of his heart, of his name, of his reputation, and it would all begin with a marriage that would shock the entire nation. Because God was about to ask the unthinkable, "Go and marry a prostitute." These were the words God spoke to Hosea, not a suggestion, a commandment, a clear order that shattered all expectations of a normal marriage, of a safe choice, of a predictable life. God was asking his prophet to unite his life with a woman whose past was public, known, marked by infidelity. Imagine the weight of that. Hosea was a respected man, a spokesperson for the Almighty. People looked to him for spiritual guidance. And now God was saying, "Marry Gomer, the woman everyone avoids, the woman who carries shame in her eyes and wounds in her soul." It wasn't just a personal challenge. It was a social scandal, a direct attack on his reputation. But there was a divine purpose behind this strangeness. God wasn't being cruel. He was being didactic. He needed Israel to understand something profound about his love for them. That even when we are unfaithful, even when we spiritually prostitute ourselves behind other gods, he continues to love us. He continues to seek us. He doesn't give up. Hosea's marriage to Gomer would be the living illustration of this sacrificial love. Every scornful glance Hosea received in the streets, every malicious whisper in the synagogues, every silent judgment of the religious leaders, all of this would be part of the message, because God was also judged for loving a people who did not deserve him. And Hosea said yes. He didn't fully understand. Perhaps he never would. But he obeyed. Because sometimes obedience precedes understanding, and what God was about to teach through this union went far beyond a simple arranged marriage. It was the gospel being enacted centuries before Christ was born. Who was Gomer? The Bible doesn't hide her story. She was the daughter of Diblaim, but this genealogical detail didn't erase what everyone knew about her. Gomer had a past that society didn't forgive, a reputation that closed doors and drove people away. She knew rejection like the back of her hand. Perhaps Gomer grew up in a broken home. Perhaps she was used, manipulated, discarded. Perhaps prostitution wasn't a free choice, but the only path left to her in a world where unprotected women didn't have many options. The biblical text doesn't romanticize this. It simply presents the stark reality. She was a woman marked by infidelity. And yet, it was precisely this woman that God chose, not a pure virgin, not a young woman from an exemplary family, but Gomer, the rejected one, the marginalized one, the one everyone pointed to as an example of what not to be, because God has always had a different standard of choice. He doesn't choose the qualified, he qualifies the chosen. When Hosea approached her with the marriage proposal, imagine what went through Gomer's mind. Surprise, distrust, fear. She knew who Hosea was, a respected prophet, an upright man. Why would he choose her? Was it piety? Was it madness? Or was it something she couldn't even name yet? Something called grace? Gomer accepted, and at that moment began a journey that would take her from the deepest abandonment to the highest redemption. She didn't know it, but her life was about to become a mirror of God's love for his people. Every failure of hers, every return, every restoration. All of this would teach future generations about forgiveness, spiritual restoration, and the power of a love that never gives up. Because God never wastes a broken story. He transforms it into a testimony. The wedding took place. Hosea and Gomer became husband and wife before God and men. But it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a relationship that began carrying the weight of two different worlds. On one side, a man who knew holiness. On the other, a woman who knew shame. And between them, the invisible distance created by the judgment of others and their own insecurities. The first few days weren't easy. Gomer walked around the house like someone who couldn't believe she was there. She expected to be rejected at any moment. After all, that's what everyone had always done to her. Hosea, for his part, struggled against his own thoughts, against the disapproving looks of the neighbors, against the inner voice that asked, "Why me? Why this?" But there was something greater sustaining that union. It wasn't just the divine commandment, it was the purpose behind it. Hosea began to understand that his marriage wasn't about him or Gomer. It was about God and Israel. Every time he chose to love Gomer despite everything, he was prophesying. Every time he demonstrated patience, he was preaching without words. Children were born: Jezreel, Lo-Ruhamah, Lo-Ami, prophetic names that carried messages of judgment and hope. The family grew, but so did the cracks in the relationship. Because loving someone who is wounded requires more than goodwill. It requires daily renunciation. It requires dying to oneself. And Hosea was learning this in practice. Oh, and before we continue, if this story is touching your heart, please leave a like below and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any Bible stories that can transform your life. Your participation strengthens this work. But back to the story. While Hosea struggled to build a home, Gomer battled her own demons. And that struggle was far from over, because some wounds don't heal quickly. Some wounds start bleeding again when we least expect it. And that's exactly what happened. Gomer left. She abandoned her home. She abandoned her children. She abandoned Hosea, and she returned to her old life, to the arms of other men, to the slavery she knew so well. It was a complete, devastating betrayal, without excuses or mitigating circumstances, and Hosea was left there, alone, dealing with the deepest pain a heart can feel. Imagine the scene. The children asking where their mother is, the neighbors whispering on street corners, "I knew it, we warned them, you can't change a person like that." And Hosea, the prophet of God, experiencing firsthand the public humiliation, the social shame, the feeling of total failure. He tried, he gave his best, and it wasn't enough. But here is the crucial point of this story. God allowed this pain, not because he was cruel, but because he wanted Hosea to feel exactly what he, God, felt when Israel betrayed him. Every time the people chased after idols, every time they exchanged the Creator for false gods, every time spiritual infidelity tore up the covenant, God felt it. And now Hosea understood. His pain was God's pain. The betrayal he suffered was a reflection of the betrayal the Lord constantly suffered. The broken marriage was a living prophecy of the broken relationship between God and his people. And this understanding, however painful, would completely transform Hosea's ministry. He could have given up. He could have gotten a divorce. The law allowed it. Society would have approved. Everyone would have said, "You did what you could. Now move on." But God had other plans. Plans that made no human sense. Plans that would require of Hosea a level of love that can only come from the heart of God himself, because the story wasn't over yet. The hardest chapter was still to come. Go again. Love that woman. God spoke to Hosea again, and this time the order was even more absurd, even more radical than the first. Go and get Gomer, even after everything, even after the betrayal, even after the public humiliation. Bring her back and love her. To anyone else, this would be madness. To Hosea's friends, it was an affront to dignity. To the religious leaders of the time, it violated all logic of justice and retribution. A woman who betrayed someone doesn't deserve to be pursued. She made her choice. Let her bear the consequences. But God thought differently. God has always thought differently. Because God's love is not based on merit. It is based on nature. He loves because he is love, not because we are lovable. And Hosea needed to demonstrate this. Not through eloquent words, not through powerful sermons, but through a concrete, tangible act impossible to ignore, going to the bottom of the well where Gomer was and bringing her back home. Hosea obeyed. Again. Because a prophet isn't someone who speaks beautifully. A prophet is someone who obeys when obedience hurts. And he left. He abandoned the comfort of what would be considered right. He set aside his wounded pride. He left public opinion outside, and he went after it. People didn't understand. They whispered, "He's gone mad. This isn't love, it's weakness." But they didn't know that this was the purest manifestation of God's character, because God does exactly that every day. He goes after us. He searches for us. He doesn't give up, even when we deserve to be abandoned. And Hosea, with a broken heart but obedient, set out on the most improbable quest in biblical history. Where was Gomer? The biblical text doesn't detail the specific places, but we can imagine she had fallen deeply, from the position of a prophet's wife to the condition of a sex slave, sold from man to man, used, discarded, worthless. The sparkle that perhaps once existed in her eyes had been extinguished. She was lost, not just geographically, emotionally, spiritually. Hosea searched in places no one else would look, in the dark corners of the city, in brothels, in slave markets. He asked questions, he investigated, he followed clues, and each step of this search was a silent sermon about the heart of God. Because God does this for us. He looks for us in ruins, in addictions, in wrong choices, in destructive relationships, in the consequences of our own sin. When Hosea finally found Gomer, the scene must have been devastating. She was unrecognizable, thin, dirty, broken, her eyes devoid of hope. She no longer expected to be rescued. She had grown accustomed to the darkness, and suddenly there he was, the man she had betrayed, the man she had humiliated, coming back for her. Why did he come? That must have been the question echoing in her mind. No one goes back for someone like that. No one pays to rescue someone who is worthless. But Hosea wasn't there because of her worth. He was there because of God's command. and because he had understood something profound about love. True love is unconditional. Gomer couldn't say anything. Perhaps you just wept. Perhaps you just stared in disbelief. But Hosea reached out his hand, and in that simple gesture was contained the entire theology of redemption that would be fully revealed centuries later on the cross of Christ. He came to get her, even when she didn't deserve it, just like God does with us. Hosea had to pay for her. 15 pieces of silver and a portion of barley. That was the price of a slave. The value the world placed on Gomer's life at that moment. But for Hosea, she was worth infinitely more, because he wasn't buying a slave. He was redeeming his wife. This payment is one of the most symbolic moments in the entire Bible. It points directly to what Christ would do in the future, to pay the price for our redemption, to buy us back from the slavery of sin, to restore us to the position of children when we were lost as slaves. The redemption of Gomer was the shadow of the cross projected in the Old Testament. When Hosea gave her that money, something changed. Gomer no longer belonged to the system that enslaved her. She had a new owner. But this new owner didn't want to dominate her. He wanted to free her. He wanted to restore her. He wanted to give her a second chance that no one else would give her. They left that place together, Hosea leading, Gomer following, in silence, with tears, with shame mixed with gratitude. She knew she didn't deserve this. He knew he had destroyed everything. But there was living proof that love can be stronger than failure, that grace can be more powerful than guilt. And as they walked through the dusty streets toward a new beginning, God looked at Israel and said through that act, "This is how I love you. This is how I seek you. This is how I pay the price for your restoration. You may have betrayed me. You may have gone after other gods. You may be broken, dirty, hopeless, but I still want you back." The rescue was complete, but the restoration still needed to happen. Returning home was only the first step. Rebuilding the relationship would be a daily, slow, and painful task, because broken trust isn't restored overnight. Deep wounds need time to heal, and both Hosea and Gomer carried the scars of that history. Hosea set clear boundaries. He told Gomer, "You will wait for me for many days. You will not prostitute yourself or be with another man, and I will be faithful to you." It wasn't rejection, it was wisdom. It was recognizing that rebuilding requires mutual commitment. It requires healing time. It requires old patterns to be broken before new ones can be established. Gomer needed to relearn what it meant to be loved without having to sell herself. She needed to relearn what home, family, and fidelity meant. It wouldn't be easy. There would be days when memories of the past would try to drag her back. Days when shame would scream louder than forgiveness. But Hosea was there, steadfast, not perfect, but present. And little by little, something began to change. Gomer began to believe that things could be different, that her past didn't define her future, that she had value not for what she did, but for who loved her. And Hosea saw in her not only the woman who betrayed him, but the woman for whom God commanded him to die to himself. They rebuilt together, one day at a time. And in that slow and painful rebuilding, they became the living image of something the whole world needs to see. That no relationship is so broken that God cannot restore it. That no heart is so lost that God cannot reach it. That no story is so stained that grace cannot rewrite it. Because their marriage was never about them. It was always about God and us. Now you understand why God asked this of Hosea. It wasn't cruelty, it was revelation. God was writing through the lives of two human beings the greatest lesson about his character. He doesn't give up on us. Even when we are unfaithful, even when we abandon him, even when we prefer idols, sins, destructive paths, he remains there, waiting, seeking, paying the price for our redemption. Israel was Gomer. The nation had prostituted its covenant with God. It had chased after Baal, after Asherah, after gods that could not save. It had exchanged the Creator for the creation, and it deserved judgment. It deserved abandonment, but God said, "No, I will bring them back. I will restore them, because my love is not based on their behavior. It is based on who I am." And today, centuries later, that message remains alive. You who are listening to this now, God wants you to know, no matter how far you have gone, no matter how many times you have betrayed him, no matter what you have done or failed to do, he still wants you back. He is still seeking you. He is still willing to pay the price for your redemption. Hosea teaches us that true love is sacrificial, that forgiveness is a decision before it is a feeling, that restoration is possible when God is at the center of the relationship, and that the greatest proof of love is not never being hurt. It is choosing to love even after being hurt. Gomer teaches us that no past is too great for God's grace, that redemption is not just a theological theory, it is a reality available to every broken heart, that you can start over, that your story is not over, that there is hope, there is healing, there is restoration. And the Bible ends the book of Hosea with a beautiful promise, "I will love them freely and willingly." That is the heart of God. Love that is not forced. It is not an obligation. It is a choice. It is nature. It is who he is. So today, if you identify with Gomer, broken, lost, thinking there's no turning back, know that God is saying, "I still want you. I still love you. I will still come for you." And if you identify with Hosea, wounded, betrayed, tired of loving someone who doesn't reciprocate, know that your obedience in loving anyway is prophesying God's character to the world. Leave a comment below. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? How is God speaking to you through Hosea and Gomer? Share this video with someone who needs to know that God hasn't given up on them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning from the most powerful stories in the Bible. Because in the end, we are all Gomer. And we all need a God who loves like Hosea loved, a God who pays the price, a God who doesn't give up, a God who restores. And this God exists. He is alive, and he is calling you back home today.